For the last few years, there's been a growing narrative floating around gaming circles, tech headlines, and comment sections that virtual reality gaming is finished, that VR had its big moment, burned bright, and then fizzled out. Headsets aren't dominating sales charts, major announcements feel fewer and farther between, and compared to the hype heavy years of the late 2010s, the industry feels noticeably quieter. To a lot of people, that silence sounds like failure, but silence doesn't always mean something is dying. Sometimes it means something is getting ready. What we're seeing right now in VR gaming isn't an ending, it's a transition. The loud, flashy experimental phase is over, and what's replaced is slower, less exciting to watch from the outside, but far more important in the long run. VR has moved out of the stage where it needed to prove it could exist and into the stage where it has to justify why it belongs. That shift is uncomfortable, especially for an industry that thrives on constant announcements and visible momentum, but it's also completely normal when you look at the history of gaming and technology as a whole. Early VR was fueled almost entirely by novelty. The idea of stepping inside a game world was powerful enough on its own that people were willing to tolerate awkward controls, bulky headsets, limited software libraries, and experiences that often felt more like tech demos than full games. That novelty phase did its job. It showed that presence mattered, that motion controls could feel natural, that immersion could fundamentally change how players interacted with digital worlds. Once those questions were answered, the hype naturally cooled. And when hype cools, people who were only paying attention because it was trendy tend to assume something went wrong. But this exact cycle has played out before. When 3D gaming first emerged in the mid 1990s, it was rough, confusing, and often unpleasant to play. Cameras fought the player, controls felt alien, and many early 3D games aged terribly. There was a point where people genuinely questioned whether 3D gaming was worth the trouble. Online multiplayer went through the same growing pains, with lag, unstable connections, and fragmented communities, making it feel unreliable and niche. Motion controls exploded with the Wii, were declared a gimmick a few years later, and then quietly became standard design elements across modern controllers. Even mobile gaming had a long, awkward adolescence before smartphones turned it into a dominant force. VR is following that same trajectory almost step for step. The reason it feels different is because VR asks more of the player than most previous shifts. It's not just a new controller or a new camera angle, it's a physical commitment. You put something on your face, you move your body, you give up awareness of the room around you. That raises the barrier to entry significantly, and it means VR can't brute force its way into the mainstream on novelty alone. It has to earn its place. For a long time, the biggest obstacles to VR gaming weren't creativity or interest, they were friction. Expensive hardware, complicated setup processes, wires running everywhere, inconsistent performance, motion sickness, short battery life, and wildly uneven software quality all stacked up against widespread adoption. Even players who genuinely liked VR often treated it as something they used occasionally rather than as part of their regular gaming routine. That's not because the idea of VR failed, but because the experience wasn't seamless enough to fit naturally into people's lives. What's important is that these problems are being addressed, just not loudly. Headsets are getting lighter and more comfortable. Displays are sharper, reducing eye strain and motion discomfort. Tracking is more accurate and less dependent on external hardware. Standalone headsets are becoming more powerful, cutting the cord without sacrificing capability. Mixed reality features are beginning to blur the line between VR and traditional gaming, easing players into immersive experiences instead of demanding a hard leap. None of this makes for explosive headlines, but all of it is essential groundwork. Another factor that makes VR feel like it's slowing down is industry consolidation. During the initial gold rush, countless studios jumped into VR development, hoping to strike it big. Some succeeded, many didn't, and a lot of experimental projects simply weren't sustainable. What we're seeing now is the ecosystem correcting itself. Weaker ideas fell away, stronger concepts survived, and developers who stuck around gain a much clearer understanding of what actually works in virtual reality rather than what simply looks impressive in trailers. That process can look like decline if you're only measuring success by volume, but in reality, it's maturation. One of the biggest misconceptions surrounding VR gaming is the idea that it needs to replace traditional gaming in order to succeed. That was never realistic and was never necessary. Gaming has always been an ecosystem of specialized experiences. Steering wheels didn't replace controllers, arcade sticks didn't replace gamepads, touchscreens didn't replace consoles. Instead, each carved out spaces where they were clearly the best option. VR will do the same. It doesn't need to be everything to everyone, it just needs to be essential where it excels. VR's true breakthrough moment hasn't happened yet, and that's okay. Every major shift in gaming waited for a specific alignment of hardware, software, and design philosophy before it truly took off. When that moment arrives for VR, it won't be defined by specs or buzzwords. It'll be defined by a game or experience that simply doesn't work the same way on a flat screen, delivered through hardware that feels effortless instead of demanding. When putting on a headset feels as natural as picking up a controller, the conversation around VR will change overnight. Quiet periods in gaming history are rarely the end of anything. They're pressure chambers. They're the moments where excess gets burned away, foundations are reinforced, and the next wave takes shape out of sight. VR gaming is in that chamber right now. It's not dead, it's not irrelevant, and it's not a failed experiment. It's waiting for the conditions that allow it to move from being impressive to being indispensable. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any future uploads. And if you want to support the channel, check out my Patreon, where the latest exclusive is a deep dive review of Metal Gear Solid and a look at how that game revived what was originally the Metal Gear franchise. Thank you for watching, and as always, game on.